Hi, Sadrah. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad. And you're getting a little break away from being a mom to come on the podcast today. How's that feel?
It's great. I always like when I can do some business travel. It's work, but it's a different kind of work, and it's a nice segmentation of my day-to-day. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Good. And you're a mom who works from home, which kind of makes your home your office your home. And it's very hard to distinguish between work and play, right?
Very much so. My partner and I, we used to work together, and now we have two separate jobs. And so when we worked together, we had the same office because we were on the same calls all the time. When we got two different jobs, it was too competing to have us both in there. So now my office is in the bedroom. And so that makes it even more of a blur between like life and work. And there's always little people coming in, and somebody who's homesick, and someone whose face pops up on the video call. And that's just the way that it goes.
Yeah, it can be tricky to work from home when you've got kids, as I also know. Mm-hmm. So tell me about your kids. How many? What ages?
My human babies. We'll talk about those. I've got two. They're 5 and 8. They're going to be 6 and 9 in a couple of months. And that seems impossible for me to think that they're already as big as they are. But they're Amaya is the older one, and Artie is the younger. And
I love those names.
Yeah. They're very lively little girls.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And they get along?
As well as siblings do. But yeah, usually they have very different interests, which is kind of unique. It's a challenge to try to find things that they both are interested in. When you're going out and you're planning activities, one is very like historically minded and wants to go on a walking tour of a new city and then learn about the historical markers. And the other one wants to go to the children's museum and do a lot of like imaginative play. And so that can cause tension sometimes because they don't always align on their interests. But overall, especially as they get a bit older, they're starting to really understand each other more, and you have more of those moments where they come up and they're actually engaging, and that's like when my heart's about to explode, and you can see them playing and like interacting more, and so that's always really cool to see.
Yeah. So tell me about veganism and where it came into your life.
Veganism came into my life when I was mid-teenager, probably 16, 17, somewhere in there. But being a vegetarian entered much sooner. I was raised a vegetarian. So wow. I grew up in a vegetarian household. And so, I have that kind of understanding about, having a home that is choosing their food really wisely, and how that was messaged to me as a kid, and then watching how that sort of shifted and changed throughout the course of my life, and then watching my 3 brothers choose their own paths, and then watching, experiencing myself go through my own journey as well in terms of where we sort of landed on the culinary spectrum. And so I think that's a really interesting perspective to bring into now raising my own kids and thinking about how I do that and how I would react one day if my kid came to me and said, hey, I don't want to be vegetarian anymore. I don't want to be vegan anymore, because I did that to my family once they shifted. They stopped being vegetarian and slowly started incorporating different animal products into their diet. And so I was the kid kind of from an opposite perspective that came to my parent and said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to eat animals. And so, thinking about how to react in those moments.
Okay, so let's go back, because that's really interesting to have been raised as a vegetarian. So I'm assuming, therefore, your parents were vegetarian, and there was a reason that they had for wanting to raise their kids vegetarian. Do you know about that?
Yeah. So I was born in the early 80s, and I have 2 older brothers and 1 younger. So it's late 70s, early to mid 80s is when we were all born. And I think my parents, they were really inspired by like the Back to the Land movement, and the Diet for the Small Planet book, specifically. And so they were really kind of counterculture in a lot of ways already. Coming out of the 60s and 70s, I was raised homeschooled. I was raised vegetarian, but when I was growing up, it was a very simple life. I grew up in a country environment on a dirt road, and we had a lot of animals. We had sheep and chickens and goats and rabbits and guinea pigs and mice and pretty much anything.
Just as like companion animals?
Just as companions. We did eat the chickens' eggs at the time, but my mom just always loved sort of the cottage life of sheep and just having them in our pastures and the peaceful sort of...
Love to have grown up with some sheep and goats in my backyard.
They were great. And I would just go up to the barn all the time and just hang out with them, to spend time, and just like me and my goat, her name was Patience. I just have such like wonderful memories of these animals growing up. And they were very much a part of our family in so many ways. And so, they were thinking about that and how they could be as like minimally impactful on the environment, and how from a processed food standpoint, they really wanted to eat very simple foods. So, as a kid, I'm eating carob chips instead of chocolate chips. And like they went like full crunchy granola style, That part of that was also, just being vegetarian. And at those times, of course, the options were not anything like we've got today.
Right.
And so we belonged to a local food co-op, and we would go to the food co-op and we would get cases of tempeh. And I remember having like the tempeh freezer in our basement, because we would have to have a separate place to store all of the tempeh that we had to buy in bulk.
Oh gosh, that is, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, you get the case of tempeh, you get the case of tofu, you get the fake and bacon, the tofu pups, like all these old school, very early innovations.
Wow, that is. I didn't even try tofu, I don't think, until like my mid-20s. And, until you know how to cook tofu, you kind of like, this tastes of nothing.
Yeah. If you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now I can't imagine life without it. I'm incorporating it into 3, 4, 5 meals a week. But yeah, you've been doing that since the 80s.
Yeah, but so it's funny. So people talk about cultural food identities. And like for me, like vegetarian food is a cultural food identity for me. And when you look at the cultures that are using ingredients that might seem, exotic or foreign or different to us, if you look to those cultures about how to prepare foods, you're used to working with that ingredient, and you kind of know how to maximize it. And so I feel like I've really gotten the experience to have a familiarity with, it's just normal to me. It's natural. And so, I grew up, again, homeschooled, vegetarian, family of 6. And so in the country, 45 minutes to the nearest, big city. And so we did a lot of cooking at home. And so, having that understanding and know-how in the kitchen, I think, was really critical. And my parents, I ate sloppy joes growing up, and like, all of these kind of stick to your ribs country food. And my mom's family was actually dairy farmers. So she grew up, in the dairy farming, like real meat and potatoes world. And then she figured out how to sort of veganize those or vegetarianize those early on. But figuring out how to flavor and season food, I think, was really important to getting families interested in eating it, and just normalization, just figuring out like, this is just what we're having for dinner tonight. And it's just, this is how we eat. And then figuring out the language to take that out into the world, because when you're home, it's a lot easier to control things, or at least to sort of create the optimal environment for things. Yeah. But then when you're out in the world, that's when things can get a little tricky.
So your mum's parents were dairy farmers. Do you think growing up around cows had any bearing on her, I guess, not wanting to eat them?
I think at the time, I think it did. I think, she has really fond memories of specific cows that she sort of bonded with as a kid that she has told me stories about. But again, like, she's not vegetarian anymore.
Yeah, so tell me about that. Yeah. So they raised you vegetarian, and at some point they both together, was it, decided to start eating meat and fish and all that?
I think it was a sort of I think the kids, my brothers in particular, started to have different social pressures from, they started going to Boy Scouts and going to cookouts, and, we would be prepared and we'd bring our tofu pups, but then, they had to be othered, and no one wants to be othered, especially kids, right? And so I think that that's sort of where things began, when we became less internal and less home focused and started going, doing a lot more activities as we got older. And, interacting with a lot of different communities, because at that time in the homeschooled community, there was also a very high vegetarian community. And so there was a lot of intersection between those two groups. And so it was sort of easy to do social events because you had like-minded people, because you had, community intersection.
Right.
And so as we started to do, we started to go to public school, and we started to just do more activities outside of the home. I think that introduced different, not like we were isolated from other perspectives, but it definitely introduced just a different element to our worlds. And so my brothers started to go to Boy Scouts, and they're bringing their tofu pups, and they're kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of like, is it still cool?
It's not even, it's not easy in today's world to not stand out as a vegan in a social situation. But at least now there exist quite a lot of faux meat products, plant-based meat products rather, that look and taste exactly like the meat product that they were based upon. And so it is easier, I think, to fit in if you have access to those products. But to turn up, I guess, to a cookout in the 90s with tofu is probably going to really make you stand up.
Yes, yeah. And so it started slowly for them. I think, they started integrating some fish at home and cooking fish, and then, it went to chicken, and then it was sort of just a slippery slope from there. And for probably 5, maybe 6 months, I started sampling some of that food.
Right.
Because, everyone else in my house was doing it.
Was that strange?
It was totally weird. It was super strange. I never really liked it. I never liked milk really as a kid. And even though I wasn't vegan, I didn't really drink or eat a lot of dairy just naturally. And, my family was really supportive. So we had alternatives in the house. But it just wasn't something I was just inherently drawn to.
Right.
And then when we started incorporating meat, I started eating that, and it didn't sit with me. It didn't satisfy me physically. It wasn't like, well, this is fantastic. This is the best thing ever. Yeah. The taste, the texture, it just wasn't what I was into. And then psychologically, I just remember asking myself, I was like, my whole life, my parents have told me that we love animals, we don't eat them, that we take care of our animals before we take care of ourselves. And now they're saying, it's fine. We eat animals now. And I was like, I couldn't fathom that. And so I remember going to my mom one day, and I'm just like, Mom, I don't think I want to eat meat. Can I just be a vegetarian again? And she was like, of course you can. And both my parents have been immensely supportive ever since.
Wow, that's amazing. It's similar to my story in a way. I wasn't raised vegetarian, but I was always raised to be kind to animals. And although we didn't have, sheep and goats at home as much as I would have loved that, I did grow up in a very rural farming community. And so, on my walk home from school, there were sheep in the fields, there were cows in the fields, and I would always try and rip up a bunch of grass and feed it to them over the fence. And my grandmother had ducks. And so I think, I had this sense of well, why are you telling me to be nice to these animals, but we're also eating them? And that was when my mom, not intentionally wanting to lie or mislead me, but just because that's how she'd been brought up, said, well, some animals are for eating and some animals are for having as companions, and we need to eat some animals to be healthy. And so she kind of tried to convince me that it was okay, to make me feel okay about it, but it never did.
Yeah.
And that's why at 10 years old, I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And she was genuinely worried that, I would become protein deficient. So encouraged me to eat fish as part of a compromise. And that was kind of the deal I made with my mother at 10 years old. Okay, I'm really uncomfortable eating animals that I've seen in the fields, but I'm a little bit more comfortable eating the animals I don't see every day. So I'm okay with that compromise. And that's kind of where I entered the sort of plant-based world, but not fully, because there was that that misinformation that my parents were giving me around needing to eat animals, and that disconnection from fish at that point, because I didn't know, I didn't know any fish. I didn't know if they felt pain. I didn't know how they suffered in the industry. So there's a lot of unknowns there, which was, how I kind of stepped into it.
Yeah, I think that age is really interesting, around 10, 11, because that's where I was when I sort of was able to vocalize for myself my desires in that area. I think for a lot of kids, it happens sooner. I think if they can make the connection, if they somehow come across the idea somewhere, or they have the cognitive ability to wonder about where their food comes from, they often kind of start to maybe not be able to vocalize it, but start to have increasing discomfort with the concept of it. But then I think around 10 or 11, that seems to be a really common age for 10, 11, 12, and like 13. That's like the sweet spot, I think, for when kids are really starting to establish their own sort of identities in that way. And it seems to be when it's make or break time in terms of how the parent or the caregiver responds to that kid.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sure a lot of parents, vegan or not, could probably relate to that and say that, yeah, maybe around that age, somewhere around that age, is when my child or my children started questioning me about the food they eat and where it comes from. But the unfortunate thing is that most parents don't have the information to answer that question correctly. They might be able to say, well, it comes from a supermarket, it comes from a farm, it comes from X animal, but they might not understand, where the nutrients originate from, that protein exists in plants, that calcium comes from plants, that we don't need to eat animals, that animals suffer in our industrialized farming system immensely, that eating animals is bad for the planet, all that stuff. They just know that it's normal and natural in today's society to eat animals. And so they will instinctively encourage it because that's what they know. And that's why I think, these conversations are really important, just to give other parents this information that they need to be able to answer in a more informed way, and then allow their children to make a more informed decision around what they eat at that pivotal moment when they're starting to become curious about food.
Yeah, I mean, the food conversations are critical. And I think that parents are very aware that, most parents, I think that high fructose corn syrup is not something they're super psyched to feed their kids.
Right.
Like, they know they know that sugar, is a leading cause of diabetes. They have a strong concept. And so they're already like coaching and providing and making choices for their kids in terms of what they're buying and what they're serving their kids around those conversations. But then when it comes to the animal product aspects, I think that there's still so much unknown about that, from my perspective as a parent, for any topic for my kids, is if they're asking, they're old enough to receive the information.
Right.
And it's my job to figure out how to communicate that information in an age-appropriate way for them.
Yeah.
And so, the kid's not going to come up and say like, well, they might, like, why can't I have more sugar? Right. And so we have kind of, as parents, an understanding of why they shouldn't have more sugar, right?
Exactly.
And we're saying it's not good for you. It's, it can lead to cavities. You need to talk, have the talking points. But I think it's important that parents also have those talking points for the day that their kid comes and says, what is a chicken wing? Where does that come from?
Yeah.
And like, that chicken over there, is it the same chicken that's over here? And I think parents don't have the language yet to figure that out. And also because they're not making those choices for themselves yet, it might feel dishonest.
Yes.
And I think parents always want to be truthful to their kids. And so it's like, how do you give them the language that's honest and age appropriate, but also not putting yourself in a situation where you look like a hypocrite in front of your kids as well.
Right.
And like, how do you balance all of that? And I think that that's like the early progression of how families change, because I think a lot of that, whether, you can saw it for my brothers in the opposite direction, but I think kids can also encourage their parents to start asking themselves the same questions. And then as they start to educate themselves and find the language, that helps the entire family evolve.
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't actually think my values have changed dramatically since I was a kid. I've always loved animals. I've always loved nature. I've always been inclined naturally to want to protect those things. But it wasn't until I became fully vegan that I felt that I was living my truth, living in accordance with my values as well as I possibly could. And I really wish that my parents had had that information to give me, which would have allowed me to make choices more aligned with my values when I was younger, so that I didn't, I don't know if waste is the right word, but spend so much of my life doing things that I didn't agree with, but without knowing that I didn't agree with them. Like, the only reason I continue then to drink milk and eat eggs and put cheese on everything until I was 30 years old is because I simply didn't have the information about what those products were doing to me, to the environment, to the animals they came from. And had I had that information, I would have been able to make choices that would have been good for me. And that makes me think of all the times people have said to me, you know, do you feel it's appropriate to push your veganism onto your child or make that decision for your child? And it's like, well, as parents, we all make decisions for our young children about what they eat because we have to, because they can't make those decisions themselves. And in a way, you can say that to any meat-eating parent. Well, are you going to push your meat-eating lifestyle upon your children? But that's not the case. We all as parents have to make the best decisions for our children based upon what we know. And like you said, most of us know that sugar isn't bad and therefore make the decision every day not to feed our child a bowl of sugar or candy or ice cream for breakfast because we know that's not the best thing to do for our child. Yeah. But yes, when it comes to animal products, most of us don't know what the best decision is to make for our child. But at least when we know and we're more informed, we can make those good decisions as loving parents.
Yeah. I think a switch it's going to take some time, but I think what we work towards is a switch where it's not seen veganism or vegetarianism is not seen as the other. It's seen as the norm. And from there, you know, sort of that's the new normal. You think about sort of the aligning with your values. And, you know, it's a young child who's growing up and who feels a certain identity, who has all of the pressures saying that's not normal. That's not the way you grow up. Boys don't wear dresses. All of these different things that can come into play when a child is trying to figure out their own identity, but they're saying this doesn't align. And I think food is the same way. And so once you sort of get permission and you're in a community where people are saying, yes, that is okay. It is another way to be, that's really a powerful point that we can get to as sort of a society where it's not just seen as the odd thing to do or the weird thing or the different and it's just, this is another way to be a human being and to show up in your full self and to show up with full authenticity and to just really align every part of yourself with your actions. And I just think that that's what I want to provide for my kids is like a yes environment where it's safe and it's supported and it's, you know, it's aligned with evidence and it's aligned with, you know, science and data and that, you know, there's so many experts that we can lean to or look towards to validate, not sort of bias validation, but like to honestly validate with peer-reviewed articles and research to look and say, like, this is the most healthful way that we can live in community with others. And this is, you know, I just think there's such like a mind-body connection when you can pull all those pieces together. You just feel more at peace. And it sounds super woo-woo, but it's like, I just, you know, I know that you feel it when you were finally able to pull together those pieces at 30 and you're like, okay, now I can live in my full self. Yeah. Like I've been in the vegan closet for 30 years trying to figure out how to get out, but everyone's telling me no, no, no. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, wait a second, there is a world for me here and I can step out in my full self and I can feel proud and I can find my people. And I know that this is like a valid way to live.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I ever felt fully comfortable eating any animal products, but yeah, society was kind of there to reassure me at all times that it was okay, it was natural, it was normal. But I don't think I was looking for veganism. I certainly wasn't looking to give up cheese. I know that much. I was actually a little bit reluctant when I discovered the information about, you know, dairy and where it comes from, what is the body and the environment. I was kind of like, oh, that's a bummer, because that's going to either mean I have to give up cheese or feel guilty about eating my cheese. And I think that's probably what puts a lot of people off doing the research, because they're afraid of what they might find and how it might make them feel and what the consequences of that might be for the choices they make. Yeah. But I think change is always scary, right? Finding out new information that challenges your worldview is intimidating. But once you find it and accept it and then start living in accordance with those values, wow, I mean, what a sense of relief that is. But it certainly was for me. So anyway, let's go back to you and your parents. They decided to start eating meat again. You tried it. Didn't love it, went back to being vegetarian. They were very supportive. So from there, how long till you became vegan and what was the trigger point?
My story's meandering. I was not a perfect vegan, but I was 15, 16. I discovered, probably maybe a little younger than that, I discovered punk rock music and started to meet other vegans and started to intersect other social justice movements, and started to kind of understand how oppression fit together. And so for me, that was kind of where things started to shift. I remember meeting another vegan who invited me to go to a demonstration. And like I was the stereotypical girl in my, Doc Martens in front of McDonald's with my sign. And, I did the whole thing. And then I was like, I'm going to go vegan. And I did. And I went to college when I was 16. I started school early. So I entered university at 16 and I was vegan and there were no options in the dining hall. And I was really grateful that I had a understanding of how to cook and prepare food for myself, because I had a hot plate in my dorm and I would get frozen vegetables and cook rice and make vegetable stir fries with tofu. And I was able to sort of bypass the dining hall meal plans and figure out how to manipulate, the items that were there and come home and put them together in different ways. And I had a little cohort of girls that would come over to my dorm and we'd all eat my food. And so I was, sharing my food with them, again, kind of sharing my culture and feeling more connected to the people that I met through that communication of food. That's like very much a love language for me. And so I was able to kind of create new relationships and build new connections through food in college. But I was vegan for several years, probably from 16 until maybe 22. And then I started to shift and I started to slip. And I started to fall victim or fall prey to a lot of misinformation and disinformation from a lot of other areas. And so, like my parents, I started to think about where my food came from more. And you would think that I would be thinking about this for my whole lifetime, given how I was raised. But again, when it's sort of your normal, you don't question it. In the same way that many meat eaters don't question why they're eating meat. Right. I never questioned why I'm vegetarian. I mean, except for that, when I stayed vegetarian, but it wasn't really like a recurring theme in my life. It was sort of like, this is just who I am. I'm vegetarian.
It's more instinctive. Yeah.
It's just, this is what I do. It's easy and it's how I live my life. But then I started to think about, okay, the environment, and I started to really get into environmental activism and thinking about the impact of the environment and the local foods movement. And so then I'm like, okay, so maybe I get my produce locally. And then that was a slippery slope. And it was really interesting because it started with local sourcing for my produce. And I started thinking about, how can I choose organic produce instead of conventional? And maybe I can teach myself to grow my own food more so, or buy it from local farms and buy it from farmers markets because of the, the carbon footprint of food. And so I started to get into the local foods movement. And then I started to think about, okay, well, I'm vegan and I'm not eating eggs and I'm not eating cheese, but how far does it take me to get that food? And so maybe I should go to the local farmer and I should, eat their products instead, because I can go down and I can see the animals and I can walk by and kind of check out their conditions and see that they're cared for and loved. And I'm like, oh, maybe. And so I start thinking about this and I start making it okay for myself. And I start looking at the ingredients of some vegan products. And I was like, oh no, that's too many ingredients. It's got to have a short, so I'm getting all of these inputs and all of these messages. And even though I knew in my heart that I don't want to participate in this, and I know what happens to male chickens, and I know what happens to female cows, and I know all of these things, and I've stood up and I've spoken out about these, myself became more important than any of the animals. And so my own self-preservation and my own place in the world and how my individual choice is going to be is going to shift based on how I choose my food. And at that time, I was getting the wrong messages. And so I started incorporating cheese and eggs and different dairy products back into my diet. And my sinuses were awful, but I was like, it's fine. It's from the raw milk from the local farm. No. And I went through this process of adding things back in, and I just didn't feel good. And then I started to undo it. And that was once I undid it, and once I started to trying to think about how I got back to that place. And it was really starting my company. I started a plant-based meat company in 2014. And when I started to go out and meet people and try to convince them to try my vegan meat, or we were just saying it was plant meat at the time. But when I started to say that, and they're like, well, why should I eat plant meat? And then I started sort of telling the same story, and I was like, wait a second,
here I am promoting veganism but not living it.
Exactly. And then it was that moment again where I'm like, I am out of alignment with my values, and how do I realign myself?
Right.
And so it kind of took that moment where I slipped and I justified, and I believed the lies, and I believed the disinformation. And then I had to go back and be like, wait a second, no, all of that is not true. Like, it's powerful, and it's very in your face, and it's very prominent and prevalent in the world, but that's not the way for me to live. And so I had to go back. And once I started to think about that and think about the actual real environmental impact of even local dairy, and starting to look at more broad systems thinking instead of local systems thinking, it's like act local, think global. I had dropped some of that, and, starting to learn about agriculture more broadly in terms of just sustainable ag work in a permaculture and systems thinking sort of mindset, and how everything is connected, that helped to link the pieces together for me. So I'm thinking about it environmentally. I'm thinking about it from a health perspective. I'm bringing back in the social justice movements, and thinking about, brownfields and fence line communities, and how all of these things that I feel inherently out of sync with, are impacted by animal agriculture. And so once all of that kind of came back into focus, it was no turning back.
I think this story about how the vegan journey isn't a simple one, you don't just become vegan and then never waver and never slip up, is a really important story to tell, because as human beings, we do trip and fall down a lot. We do things against our values, and it doesn't make us a bad person. It doesn't make us a failure. But I think too often, particularly in the vegan movement, we're very quick to attack and vilify anybody who slips up. And you're a perfect example of how a slip up is just, it's just a bump in the road. It's not the end of the road. And you are now a marketing director for a big global vegan organization. You're having incredible impacts. You're an amazing vegan advocate, and you're an amazing vegan parent. And you've done all these things without having this perfect journey. You've ended up here, and I'm sure the journey goes on and will evolve much more. But I think that's why it's really important when people do turn away from veganism, have a bump in the road, make a mistake, waver. It's really important to give people grace and support them through that, because, as I said, it's not the end for them. It's not the end of their vegan journey. It could just be the beginning of a much more important chapter in their vegan journey. And I think if we don't support people and we kind of kick them out the movement as soon as they say, I went back to eating eggs, then we never find out if they could become a vegan as impactful as yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, nobody's perfect, and most people aren't, born vegan. Some people are, but everyone has an origin story. And I think that with any other pattern of change, I think you have to look for positive steps where you can find them. And so I think, I'm a huge proponent of imperfect veganism or plant-based living. And, I think that you can take, if your intention is good and you're working towards the outcome that is right for you and is best, I think that is the journey that we have to take. And it's like everything is a spectrum, and everything sort of slips, and it's just a natural, nothing's just a linear line where you start at point A and you end at point B, because that's not how humans evolve, and that's not how people operate. You're always taking in new information, and you're doing your best to synthesize that and make the right choices. But parenting's not perfect. It's messy as can be. And, when you're trying to strive for something that's perfection, it's just unattainable. And I think that's not the type of movement that I want to build, and that's not the type of movement that I want to create. I want to create space for people to show up authentically. And when you show up authentically, sometimes you don't always make the right choice. Sometimes you make the choice that felt reasonable that day, and then you have new information the next day, and you should be allowed to take in that new information and pivot. Because if you when you don't, you make a choice based on the information that you have in front of you, and then you realize that that's not the information that is accurate, you can make a better choice the next day. Like, every day is a new opportunity to make a different choice. And I think even if you fall back one day, it doesn't wipe out everything that you've done to that point. I think you can still continuously progress towards a more values-aligned way of life.
Yeah. And that makes me think about, wow, the amount of vegans I know who are parents who've wanted to raise their children vegan, right? But as their children have grown up, they've determined for themselves that veganism isn't right for them, or that they want to, toy with vegetarianism, or they've gone back and forth. And they've often said to me, I feel like I failed in some way. I feel disappointed in myself as a parent because my children haven't stayed vegan. And I said, well, your children are still evolving. And so, of course, they're going to explore the world. They're going to do things that don't align with their values and how they were brought up. They're going to make mistakes because they're human like us. Have we made lots of mistakes? Yes, I've made so many mistakes. But, it's all helped me to become or educate myself about who I want to be, and brought me to this position I'm in today, where I'm still not where I want to be and who I want to be, but I'm working, like you say, more towards it every day. And I think that as parents, we really need to give ourselves grace. Like, it's such a hard job raising kids, and it's impossible. It's just an impossibly unrealistic hope that they will never do anything that you don't disapprove of.
But isn't that what you want, though? Like, I want to raise kids that feel empowered to make the decisions for themselves. Yes. I don't want to raise just like little foot soldiers who do what I tell them. Yes. Like, I want them to push back, and I want them to rebel. And that might not look the way I want it to look, but to me, that's providing them with the tools to stand up in challenging situations in other contexts throughout their life. And so, I want to create kids who feel conviction, who feel an internal sense of justice, not just because I say something's right. I need them to understand it for themselves so that they can then, when I'm not in the room, they feel supported and strong in their identity, so they can say, you know what? No, thanks. I don't eat cheese. And they can have that language to do that themselves. And maybe that rebellion and that looks different. Maybe that means that they do go out and they're like, I'm going to eat cheese. I'm just going to be vegetarian. And that might not be my choice for them. But my role as a parent is to provide them with the voice and the security to know that they're selves, and then continuously support them through my example of how life should be led. And so I think I need to be a trustworthy source for them and a safe place for them. So when they look for answers, they look to me and they are seeing my example. And that's like the best that I can hope to do. But I want the kids to make their own choices.
They have to. Yeah, they have to explore the world and come to their own decisions. That that's the same with vegan advocacy generally, isn't it? I mean, nobody can make anybody do something that they don't want to do, but they can present them with a way of leading a life that might be in accordance with their values, showing them that it's possible, showing them that it's ethical and sustainable and healthy. If we can lead by example, I think as vegans and as parents, then we can only then expect the best results for the individual that's watching.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got, a 2.5-year-old, and she's very feisty, but I love that. I love it when she pushes back and shows me who she is and who she wants to be. I hope she will find who she is. I hope that person will be a vegan, but, there's no guarantees. I'll love her whatever and support her whatever. Yeah, but I at least will know that I raised her in a very healthy, very ethical, very just way of life, and as best I could. And that's, I think, all we can try to do as parents, right? Yeah. So your children now, have they been raised vegan?
Yeah, my oldest, she was born right before the full reconnection to
veganization
veganism.
of yourself.
So we actually had backyard chickens that were rescue hens, but we were eating their eggs when she was first born. So she had some of their eggs, but we were already starting to peel things off from our food choices by the time she entered the world. So very, very early in her life, we stopped eating those eggs and started giving them back to our chickens, realizing that is much better for them. I
don't think a lot of people know that, but chickens actually in nature would eat their own unfertilized eggs for nutrients.
And everyone asked me, so like, well, so you're not eating eggs anymore? Are you eating your own? No. Then what are you doing with them?
What are you doing with them?
I'm scrambling them up in the morning and I am feeding them back to my hens, and it's good for them and they love it.
Yeah, it's nature.
So they more or less have been raised vegan. Our younger one has been vegan since birth. And do they ever eat something that has dairy in it? Yeah, sure they do. Have they ever had a cupcake that has an egg in it? Yes, like they have. And, a lot of people are like, they've had it, but it's
really difficult to avoid
in certain
situations without, forcing them to become a social pariah.
Yeah.
And you have to make those decisions about, well, are they going to be more welcoming of this lifestyle when they get older? If I ban them from going to any birthday parties where there's dairy served, or are they maybe going to be have more positive kind of interactions with veganism if I don't allow it to impact them negatively?
That's exactly it. I'm trying to keep it positive for them because I don't want to be their bully in this. And I mean, I don't want to be anybody's bully, but I certainly don't want to be a bully to my kids. And so they understand very, very clearly why I make the choices I make, why I think it's the correct choice and the best healthy, health choice for them. I talk to them about, the different systems that it interconnects with in an age-appropriate way. I give them all of the information. And then if a situation, and I try to be prepared. So with the birthday party situation, I try to, a lot of parents are actually super conscious these days, and they'll say, like, are there any dietary, gluten-free is so big.
Yeah,
and
it's good, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot more.
They provide an opportunity to bring your own food or to have something brought in for you.
Yeah, so there's a lot more sort of awareness more broadly. So there's either an option already there for the kids, or if we know we've got a party coming up, I make sure that we have something that they can enjoy. It might not be the same thing that all the other kids are eating, but the kids just want to participate. Again, it's that sense of belonging. And so, I try my best to do that. Are there times when we've shown up and the kids are like, oh, I really want a cupcake? And it's a really hard internal struggle for me because I don't want to say like, yes, it's fine because we're celebrating. Like, I don't want to communicate that celebration means like suffering and that we can celebrate suffering. And like, that's not really my mindset that I want to relay to my kids. So I try to tell them like, that cupcake, has butter and eggs in it. We've talked about this. It is your choice whether you would like to have the cupcake or, I'm not going to be eating it. And mom would choose not to, but I want you to make the decision for yourself. And most of the time they choose to not have the cupcake. Sometimes they really want it. And, and I don't want to be like, you shouldn't have that cupcake. I don't want
Or you can't. Or
you can't.
We're leaving. It's not a great way to give them a positive experience of veganism. And that's what it should be. It should be about love and positivity.
Yeah, but at such a young age that they're able to sort of ask themselves that question and check in with themselves, I think that's the lesson there. Like, they're not always going to make the perfect choice or the choice that I want them to make, but I think the exercise is critical, where we're reminding them of our values, we're reminding them why we might make a certain choice, and then we're saying it is your body and is your choice. You know the same information I know now. I need you to come up with this on your own. And it's empowering for them to feel that. And a lot of the times, and also to feel the support when they know that they're not doing something that I would like them to do, but they still feel like they're loved. And, I think that's the message.
Yeah, I think it's really nice to say, what do you think you should do? Like, here's what we know about this product or this action. What do you think you should do in this situation? And hope that we've given them the foundation to make the right choice.
Yeah, and I don't want to create judgment and shame around food either. Like, there's so many food issues in terms of like, that cupcake's got sugar, or that cupcake's got fat.
Which is exactly what I grew up with.
And so, and I don't want to sort of do that same sort of food shaming with them from a different angle. So, I will say that cupcake's not vegan, but this is what we know. It's up to you.
Yeah, it's true. There should not be any shame around food, but there should be education.
Yeah,
for sure. for
Yeah.
sure.
But at home, we never buy any animal products. Never any complaints come up. Nobody's ever asking for some non-vegan product to be bought for the home or anything like that. So, I think what you can do the majority of the time is, again, that sort of imperfect practice of life where, when you have the control of being in your house and you can, really manipulate that in the way that makes sense, then you do. Yeah.
Do you anticipate challenges with regards to how they want to live their lives and how they want to eat when they're a bit older? They're young now. It's more of an impressionable age. But when they're teenagers, adults, do you foresee any challenges or?
I don't know. I would like to think not. Of course, I'm approaching it with optimism. And I also think that, again, optimistically, the shape of the world will change as they grow and it will evolve along with them at the same time. So a lot of those external pressures that might have impacted them may not be as prevalent when they're a bit older. So, I'm hoping that the community at large is more accepting.
Right.
You're already seeing it in Gen Z and, the younger generations who are starting to do more flexitarian diets and starting to be more comfortable about creating a more balanced intake of animal products.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that continues, that's what I advocate for every day, that continues to grow so that by the time they're a little bit older and they're, going out to more social events on their own, that they're not as othered. And there's, maybe a friend that they have who's also vegetarian, because I think that finding that community is really key. So if they have, I did that actually when I was in 6th grade. That was another driver for me. When I went back to my parents and said, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, I had met a really good friend at school who was vegetarian. And so finding that person who kind of showed me that I can be an 11-year-old girl and be vegetarian even if my family's not, that was really critical. So I think that sort of buddy system, or if they can find that community or that space, and certainly when I went vegan again full time later in life, it was re-entering the vegan and vegetarian space and finding community in that space and saying, oh yeah, this is the world I want to be in. So I think, that's what I'm hopeful for them, is that more broadly, that it's not just a segment of a community, but just the world overall is more accepting. And so they find space and belonging within it.
I think there's promise, isn't there, that the world would be more accepting of vegans in 5, 10, 15 years' time, because I certainly know growing up, I didn't have the social consciousness or the understanding of different social justice issues that we generally have as a society today. Discussions about trans rights, gay rights, Black lives. These were not sort of talking points when I was growing up, but they very much are now. Now we don't make as many presumptions about people. We're much more curious and much more accepting, generally. We've still got a long way to go, of course. So I do hope we get there with veganism, because I think, right now, vegans are generally seen as outliers, seen as extremists, seen as a bit odd. Yeah. Right? And we're all a bit odd. Yeah. But yeah, I think as a progressive society, it would only make sense that we continue to evolve and become more compassionate, sensitive, conscious, thoughtful people. And in line with that a higher percentage of the population will become vegan. And at least those that aren't will see veganism as more of a normalized vital social justice movement, something that's necessary for us to keep evolving as a species.
Yeah. And I think too, I'm already starting to see my kids be able to pull together the connections that took me so long to make. Because I talked to them about, the LGBT community, and I talked to them about the Black Lives Movement, and I talked to them about all of these other social justice adjacent movements, but they're not really adjacent. They're all one and the same. And so you want to have these conversations with our kids, and we're reading books, and, we're talking about, systems of oppression, and they can say to me oh, that's like when, animals are kept in cages, and, that species, we talk about speciesism. It's just a different part of our language that, exists more broadly in our home than has in generations prior. And I think that there's more and more families, people are saying like, why are there so many kids who are coming out so much younger these days? And it's not really that there's any more gay kids than there ever have been before.
Yeah.
There's always been gay kids. There's always been trans people.
Yeah.
But they're feeling more allowed to live
They're not as
their
afraid
lives.
to come
They're not
out.
as afraid. They have the language. They have the tools. And I think that in very different but somewhat similar ways, we're creating a community that's welcoming for everybody in the same way and helping people make those connections.
I was so afraid to be different when I was a kid. I wanted to fit in so bad.
Yeah.
Most of the kids in my class had blonde hair. And so therefore I desperately wanted blonde hair and would try and bleach it with all these random sprays that I could get at the local pharmacy. And even as a vegetarian, who just had no desire to eat meat, I was always very apologetic for it. If I went on a date in my teens, my early 20s, I would say like, oh, I need to tell you something. And I apologize in advance for any inconvenience it might cause you. But I don't eat meat, but don't worry. I don't mind if you do. Like this whole thing about not being comfortable with who we are and feeling like we need to make apologies for ourselves. I think vegans do that a lot. Hi, I'm sorry I'm vegan. I'm sorry to an inconvenience. I hope we get to a stage where at least we feel proud to say it, because we should, because people say they're proud to recycle, proud to be advocates for various social justice movements. But I think although we can be loud, we also feel, apologetic for being vegan a lot. And I think we need to, as a movement, get beyond that and feel a bit more proud of ourselves.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a question. For any parent who may be thinking of starting a family or already has children and feels aligned with the vegan philosophy, but reluctant to maybe try to raise their children vegan because of the things we've talked about, right? Because of this not wanting to make them into a social pariah, being worried about how to do it, when is too soon to tell them about, where food comes from and the impacts of our food choices. I mean, do you have like a general message for parents who are curious about bringing this philosophy into the raising of their family?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think if you're thinking about it, then you're on the right track. And I think it starts with education and then figuring out how to get yourself comfortable with the subject and the topic first. And so if you're thinking like, all right, I want to sort of eke my family or nudge my family in this direction, educate yourself, meet some other people who are living this lifestyle. There's so many groups on the internet that you can go out to and find meal plans and recipes and different reasons. And I think when you're comfortable with the topic, then you're much more confident and capable of changing minds as well. And so starting small, educating yourself so that you're comfortable with it, and then trying it out for just a day. And don't make a big deal out of it. Like, I don't think it needs to be this whole thing like, we're vegan now. Like, you don't have to have like a huge party and tell everyone that you know, because that also like it makes it difficult for you to have to have imperfection, right? So I think that you can just say like, hey, we're going to try to eat less. And I think that is a huge positive step.
Yeah.
And so once you start to eat less, cheese is always super hard for people, right? I know you said it was hard for you. I used to smoke. I don't know if you ever smoked, but
well, don't tell my parents, but I definitely tried a few cigarettes.
Yeah. So I smoked for a long time. And when I was smoking, completely natural for me, had no, understanding of how it impacted anyone else in the room, didn't care, really addicted to it, made me feel good, wanted to keep doing it. And eventually, as I got further and further away from smoking, the more disgusting I realized that it was. And I look back at it, I'm like, God, I cannot imagine I ever did that. And now when I'm around cigarettes, my nasals get all congested and everything just feels bad. It was like that with cheese for me too. Once I got away from it, I now look back and I'm like, I can't believe I ever ate that. Like now. And so I think like once it becomes not your normal anymore and you slowly kind of peel it away and make more frequent positive choices, the easier that it becomes long term. And the more distance that you get from living the way you used to live, the more foreign that life becomes to you. And I think that that's you no longer look at those things as food. And so if you slowly start incorporating different ingredients and kids don't like new things. They don't like new foods. So you don't want to be like, we're going to try this new cheese made from plants. So kids going to be like, what? Just make them the food that they already love. Swap out one ingredient in that recipe and slowly start to like infiltrate their meal times with more plant-based options.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're doing anyway. You're trying to sneak in the broccoli by blending it in the pasta sauce or whatever. Just go a little bit further.
And it's true what you say, like being a vegan is not hard, but the transition can be.
Transition's rough.
And if you don't feel like you are capable of transitioning overnight, which is the case for definitely most people, if not all, then like start to lean into it. Start to switch out. And there's a lot of programs out there where you can get guidance on how to transition gradually. I know, Generation Vegan supports that. There's OMD for the Planet, which is, switching to one meal a day, plant-based for planetary reasons. There's Meat-Free Mondays. There's loads of different, We Are the Weather. I think that's like until 5, have 2 of your meals plant-based. There's lots of ways you can do it. And I think the more you do it, the easier it becomes until, as you say, it becomes natural and kind of inconceivable to eat any other way.
Yeah.
And wow, what an abundance of amazing foods there are out there that are plant-based that most meat eaters will not have tried yet, but are going to absolutely love when they do. So I personally encourage exploration, like try new ingredients, try new recipes, and you never know, a year from now, you might be eating in a completely different way and you might love it and you might just wish you'd have done it sooner.
Yeah, but some people aren't culinarily creative, right? And so, I don't think that you have to think about like, I have to completely change the way that I eat. I think start small. Think about the recipes that you already love today. What's your kid's favorite recipe? What's your kid's favorite food? Figure out how to just switch that one food and make them love that. People are like, oh, I could never eat vegan food. I've never had vegan food. It's like, you've had French fries. You've had bread. You have had vegan food.
Yeah, you have
so like,
pasta
try to remove the stigma around it and just give yourself permission to have some fun.
Yeah, like when we say recipes, it's not even like a recipe. If your kid's favorite, recipe/meal is a cheese sandwich, right? Then just switch out the cheese for a plant-based cheese. And if they don't like that brand of plant-based cheese, well, try a different brand. There's so many brands out there. You can make your own if you are so inclined. But that's the thing. Yeah, like just make switches. Don't feel like you have to suddenly start eating bowls of kale, nuts, and tofu.
Exactly.
Like it can be the same diet with switches.
Yep.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me. It was really interesting hearing about how you were brought up and how you've influenced your children to be good humans.
Oh, I try every day. Time will tell.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. But I think that's all we can do as parents is do our best.
For sure.
Thanks.
Thanks.